At the risk of sounding too dramatic, I will say that ontological flexibility is the key competency of transdisciplinarity. Without ontological flexibility, transdisciplinarity at best becomes maybe patronizing, condescending, and at worst it becomes neocolonial and dishonest. And I have been practicing and advocating transdisciplinarity for over a decade now, and but only recently I realized how dishonest I have been, and I'm working on that. It's work in progress. I hope that I find ways of overcoming that. And it's challenging though. It's challenging because it involves, in a sense, on practicing ontological flexibility involves, in a sense, identifying, softening, and unlearning basic existential commitments. And existential commitments, by definition, are existential. They are supposed to be, fixed and not being questioned, right? So, and some of these commitments involve academic commitments, like the search for single, stable, final truths, right? And that are internalized through universalizing or universalist education as well, and then they are institutionalized through the university, right? So if we agree that ontological flexibility is key for transdisciplinarity, then we also need to ask, can we teach it? How, ontological flexibility, can it be taught? And if so, how? And also, can it be taught using the same? Because we have a problem. Yeah. Cannot hear me? We can listen to the birds a little bit more. Están prestando atención. Sí. ¿No? Extraño, ¿no? Todas dicen que now I have to start over again. That's no, pero no se mueve. No, vamos a tener que reiniciar parte.
Prima, también hay cada vez específicamente en la dirección del niño, termina llamando William en las preguntas para y en eso desintegrado. Y ahora, las disculpas. No, ya sabes que a veces cuando no se queja de menos sobre exactamente este no podíamos dar con una forma de eso es lo que la sección. Gaby, ¿cómo pasar se fue? Porque luego con nadie, pero gracias. Y que eso va a poder que quiere dejar que el misterio siga en tu vida. Sí.
Que no hay casi interferencia sonora de otra parte. Sí, pero sí, es muy audible. Sí, tuvieron un momento dramático con eso.
Debí llegar a preguntar si querías un poco más de luz, pero lo puedo. Y gente más fresco, sí. Y estoy bien, pero
para los otros. Para que no se duerma la... Por mí.
Ahora sí.
Ah, ¿funcionó?
Sí, somos 80 años.
Ok, perfecto.
Muy bien.
Y entonces lo paso yo entonces o
Y
lo pasa. Ok. Ok. Próxima. Próxima, sí. Ahí. Ahí es donde me quedé, ¿verdad? Okay, welcome again to the 12th presentation today. So, yes. Okay, so I had this question at the beginning on whether we can teach ontological flexibility, and I don't have an answer. So, but I'll introduce some elements that may help the discussion of that question, the collective discussion. For the second question, I have a few answers, and it's if it's important for transdisciplinarity, is it also important for sustainability transformations? And then what I have is because whenever we use the term ontology or ontological, there is a risk of having and ending up having very abstract and dry conversations. So I introduced this notion of warm-up exercises and vignettes in order to ground the conversation a little bit more in experiences. Next, please. So before I tackle these two questions, it's important to understand the origins of this ontological flexibility concept. And the origins are in indigenous activism and scholarship. And they are rooted in, of course, things like these are just examples. The Zapatistas' idea of a world where many worlds fit. Indigenous authors and scholars like Linda Tijuana Smith from the Maori, sorry. Sean Wilson from North America and Bagele Chilisa from Africa. They have all proposed indigenous methods and methodologies. They have books about that. And there are other concepts, for instance, two-eye seeing. It's a concept that was popularized by Mikau Elder Albert Marshall from Canada. And it's the idea that we can see any reality or any problem simultaneously with an indigenous eye and a Eurocentric eye. And they say that indigenous people were forced to develop this two-eye seeing perspective, but we all should develop this ability. And it's not only two eyes, it's more than two, right? But it all refers to this, or is related to this notion of ontological flexibility. And then we have Abadio Green's Pedagogía de la Tierra, which proposes that we can learn directly from Mother Earth. There are many more. These are just some examples. Also, this questioning of Eurocentric Western ontologies or the predominance of these ontologies have been codified in terms of decolonial and pluriversal scholarship. Just some examples: Walter Mignolo, delinking, or Boaventura Sosa de Santos, abyssal thinking. Arturo Escobar, pluriversal transitions or pluriversal politics, and Gloria Anzaldua's border thinking, right? Just to mention a few. But recently, in the last maybe 5 years, what we have is people from the social sciences in fields that you wouldn't expect, like international relations or assessment science, evaluation science. And these are, in many cases, women from based in Latin America, like Tamara, who is based in Quito, or Cristina, who is based in Brasilia. And they are introducing these more practical ways of talking about on ontologies, or more practical ways of challenging the dominance of Western ontology through concepts like ontological flexibility, competence, or agility. So I think there is an opportunity, I think, for SARAS and for the Latin American Observatory of Environmental Humanities for the Environment, to engage with this movement, with these authors and people who and roots also that are based in the continent, right? And contribute and reinforce. So, and everyone is invited to become part of this observatory. I will, we can talk later, or you can write me if you're interested in learning more about that. Can we go to the next? So the first question was, can we teach ontological flexibility? And one can think of a set of skills that could be associated with ontological flexibility, like continuously interrogating and be open to changes in our ontological stance, right? Be knowledgeable and respectful of the ontological stance of others, or commit to not privileging, our ontological stance over that of others, right? So these are all good skills that could be associated with that. And but in a sense, they are very analytical and ontological, or very ethical, and they are based on action and thinking. And the problem is that ontological flexibility, or ontology in general, has to be with the domain of being, right? So I have my doubts that we can actually, teach ontological flexibility through a set of skills, right? If it has to do with this unlearning of basic existential commitments, so how do we do that? I don't have an answer, so we can maybe discuss this. Can we go to the next? In relation to the second question, why does ontological flexibility matter for sustainability transformations? The most obvious answer is at the level of the metaphysics. It has to do with the fact that the environmental, social crisis that we are facing, which in reality are the crisis of a particular mode of existence, right? I'm not going to name that because we all know. But this crisis have their origin in this predominance of a particular ontology based on separation that considers matter and objects as fundamental, right? And what we need, of course, to do is to deflate that predominance and bring other ontologies, like relational ontologies from indigenous people, that consider or assume relationships as fundamental, or Eastern maybe ontologies that assume consciousness as fundamental. And these are just some examples, right? But also, this cannot be an inclusion-based project of just consisting of adding more voices to the pot. It has to do with engaging across and through pluriversal worlds in meaningful ways, right? So it's not just a pluralist type of a strategy. Yeah? It has to do with engaging at a different level, and ultimately has to do with political and personal change. Can we see the next, please? So, and in terms of this personal change or personal transformation, I have some evidence, recent evidence. We published this paper in the Journal of Social Innovation just last month. And what we did in this study is to interview 56 transformations practitioners or academics. And we asked them, how did you become a transformation practitioner? And in many cases, or in most cases, they reported that this process of becoming a transformation practitioner involved onto-epistemological crisis. And these crises were caused by two factors. The first factors were to realizing that there is something fundamentally wrong with science and something fundamentally wrong with professional practices, the way they have been conducted by them. So that was something that we were expecting to find. But what we weren't expecting to find is that it also, in many cases, involved meaningful interactions with non-Western cultures, in particular with indigenous cultures. And these two causes, these two factors, trigger a process of letting go and unlearning that was then, making, provoking lifestyle changes, provoking these ontological deeper changes. Can we go to the next? So after saying all these ideas, let's start with the first vignette. When I thought about these vignettes or warm-up exercises, I was thinking, if I were to ask you how ontologically flexible you are, would you be able to provide me an answer? Do you have a way of even start to measure that, right? Probably not. So this, or yes, I don't know, but these vignettes try to provide like a tool for keep asking this question, maybe not answering, but keep asking this question. And in a sense, the first vignette is a real story. And maybe we can go to the next. It's a real story that happened once upon a time, well, actually it was 5 years ago, in one of my field trips to the Ecuadorian Amazon. I was heading to Guarani village with, whoa. I was with my colleague Todd Swanson, who is also an ASU professor. He's in the middle in the picture, and I was also with Miguel, who was an actuar, and I say was because he passed away from COVID, and he was taking this picture. And also Pedro, who is at the extreme there, he also passed away from COVID, unfortunately. But I was asking them, about all these animals that are disappearing from the forest. There are less animals and all that, and they corrected me. Animals are not disappearing; they are just hiding deeper into the forest. In fact, if anything is disappearing, it's us. We are disappearing for the forest world, and whenever we allow it, animals are going to come back, right? I knew that if I had heard that 10 years before, I wouldn't be. I would have been unable to listen. I would have closed my mind. It was because, biology tells us that animals go extinct. They're right. We're in the 6th mass extinction, right? And animals actually disappear, right? So there was a lot of epistemological dissonance, but it wasn't really just the epistemological dissonance. There was an ontological dissonance. Because accepting that meant for me that all my teaching, all my projects, my professional engagement, my identity as biodiversity, defender, and things like that, had to be challenged. And I wasn't ready for that. I didn't have enough ontological room or ontological flexibility to make the two worlds compatible, to allow them to coexist, right? So, but not that morning. I mean, that morning I had made enough room, and this didn't mean that I had to give up on all the realist, empiricist knowledge that I had accumulated for many decades, right? But it meant that I would have the sensibility to see what truth there is in this idea, right? And there is actually a lot of truth, because first, many times with some species are declared extinct, and they are actually there. We don't really know. I mean, there is no a lot of certainty in terms of, because we don't know. They hide, actually. That's a reality. Also, it's a matter of time and how time is conceived, right? In the long term, if you give them enough time, species are going to come back. Not the same, maybe, but they are going to come back. So and also we don't really know about what is going to happen in that. But of course, that involves a different understanding of time, you know, and evolution. So yeah, that's the first vignette. And now let's go to the second one. Also, what I learned that day is that species, these animals, not only don't disappear, but there are cities of animals in the forest. And these cities have cars and they have roads and all that, right? So, and I think they weren't mocking me because they were as serious as before, and I tried to, are you sure? So they also somehow had seen that or heard that. But of course, this part led me to think about there might be some limits to ontological flexibility, right? And it's something that we can also discuss. Let's go to the next. And you know, if you have any, if you want to make any intervention in terms of the vignettes, I can also, you know, I can leave some of the vignettes out because the most important thing is to have a discussion. So if you, but for this vignette, this is a book that was published very recently, and I have an excerpt, and I hope we can listen to it. Yeah, an excerpt of an interview to the author, Matthew Sakistewa, who is a Hopi. He's an enrolled member of the Hopi Nation and also a professor at the University of Arizona. And he talks about, if we can hear. Yeah.
What you think this history of running, which continues today also.
Learning. Cyclical.
Were you able to understand? Yeah. Okay. So I think I introduced this vignette because there is also a cyclical element in the ontological flexibility, right? Because you have here someone who was born in the Hopi nation, who grew up as a Hopi, and then he went to academia, and then his ontology kind of changed in a sense, not keep, but in a sense kept some level of flexibility, so that when he met Victor and heard this story, something cling, right? So it was there somehow, but he wasn't aware, maybe, right? And one wonders, whether you need to go through that cycle. At what point, you enter into a loop in which you are, because you cannot be all the time inhabiting different worlds, but the different worlds kind of inhabit you in a sense, and then you're available to visit them, right? So it's a movement, really, It's an internal movement in a sense, the notion of ontological flexibility. Last vignette. So this is a little bit different. Maybe you're familiar with sargassum. It's a macroalgae that is invading the Caribbean. In the last over the last 10 years, there has been globally a combination of factors that led into a tipping point. Warmer waters and nutrient-richer waters combine, and then you have these flows of sargassum that invade all the Mexican Caribbean and all the Caribbean, and even in Miami and other parts. And it's a problem for tourism, right? And it's a problem for the local people. At the local level, in places like Punta Allen, which is a community of fishers in the south of Quintana Roo, the fishers and other people just remove the sargassum without using any protections, sometimes barefoot. And there is a process of fermentation of the algae when it stays for a couple of days that produces corrosive acids like sulfuric and ammonium and ammonia and methane, others. And this has effects on health. And Norma Munoz is conducting this study about the health problems associated with sargassum. And this is one comment that she made that I found very interesting. People are not well informed about the health effects from sargassum. They say ailments are sent by God. So in terms, I think, of ontological flexibility, it's another challenge. What do we do with a reality like that, right? Or is there any knowledge, or is there based on some reality, or we can discount this as superstition? So again, something to discuss. And last, just to end, I have a quote from I don't know, you are probably familiar with the concept of reworlding, which is also very much associated with ontological flexibility, I think. There is a special issue recently published, and Carlos, I think it's Carlos Tomel, who is a Mexican who lives in the UK, and who has worked with Arturo Escobar. Arturo Escobar has been probably one of the people who have, thought more through about this. But they have this quote in this special issue: natural scientists extend their worldviews to society and attribute to Homo sapiens the responsibility of these changes. From this perspective, humanity then becomes the doom bringer, but also the savior. It's through the newly formed hope of creating a planetary stewardship in modern technology and science that humanity can overcome these huge challenges. So this is, of course, the way in which the dominant Eurocentric, the dominant response within that ontology, right? Within that ontology that we prioritize. On the other hand, this forces us to look at those whose alterity is actively denied by this project and whose very existence has been historically oppressed and actively made invisible by a particular ontology. So, again, this is bringing more like the political dimension that even though I focus more on the personal transformation dimension, of course, there are lots of political elements to this. And that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yes. There's a hand online. Okay, is it okay if we start with Kata online? Hi, Kata.
Hi. Well, first of all, I just
We cannot hear. Wait. ¿Ya? ¿Prueba?
What about now? Do you hear me?
Now we hear you.
Okay, so first of all, hello. And I'm so sorry that I'm not with you guys there. I woke up this morning after some sort of food poisoning that stopped me from taking a plane, feeling like I didn't know what I was. Part of me thinks still that I'm there. That last two presentations resonated enormously with me. I was there as well in Waurani Reservation, South Swanson, and you will see that I'm also working with Targasso. And I was also like turning in my seat when we talked about Bateson and Ecología de la Mente. And I think I have an idea about how to put that last two presentations together, hitting them against each other. So I was thinking that maybe I'll say this part in Spanish because this is for the previous speaker, that las tecnologías de la mente es la parte principal de toda la metodología transdisciplinaria. Tenemos que comenzar con esas tecnologías. Cuando dijiste que hay una imposibilidad de reconciliar uno mismo con el mundo, yo salté un poquito, pensé tal vez dificultad, porque si es imposible, entonces vamos a realmente ser condenados a ser extractivistas y a dañar el mundo con el que trabajamos, entonces tal vez debería ser una lucha. Y al final dijiste que la naturaleza es lo inimaginable, y luego Jorge reaccionó diciendo, pero bueno, pero aquí estamos topándonos con Dios. Y yo pensé que bueno, que no debería ser reducida la naturaleza al contenido de nuestra mente, porque en realidad somos nosotros los que somos parte de la naturaleza. La naturaleza tal vez nos piensa a nosotros y no nosotros pensamos a la naturaleza. Entonces, ¿dónde es el origen? Y ahora lo voy a conectar con la presentación de David Manuel. Entonces, la flexibilidad ontológica. Estuve pensando recientemente, conduciendo mucho, haciendo trabajo aquí en Yucatán, escuché el libro de David Abram, The Spell of the Sensual, que recomiendo mucho. En este libro, David Abram describe un momento cuando observa una familia que deposita arroz para los espíritus de la casa en diferentes partes de su jardín. Eso es lo que le dicen, que es para los espíritus de la casa, pero lo observa que ese arroz es comido por las hormigas. Y bueno, dice que espíritus de la casa es comido por las hormigas, y luego se le ocurre, a lo mejor es lo mismo. A lo mejor para todo lo que piensan los pueblos nativos, que los antropólogos piensan que son los espíritus, es la naturaleza. Entonces, a lo mejor ese inimaginable divinidad, ¿no? Lo espiritual es la naturaleza, ¿no? Entonces, estamos en lo real, lo más profundo de lo real, y no en la fantasía de nuestra mente. Entonces, bueno, esa es mi protesta, propuesta y reacción.
Bueno, sí, claro.
Gracias, Cata. No traje los lentes. No sé exactamente qué responderte, pero me parece que en el libro de Abraham, él, además de ser, creo que es antropólogo, pero él además es chamán. Y eso sí es un dato importante a tener en cuenta. Es decir, es alguien que puede hacer pasajes ontológicos, puede hacer esos cambios de mundos, y no me parece un dato importante en cuanto a entender que el espíritu del bosque o que el espíritu de la selva finalmente son esas hormigas, o en todo caso son esas hormigas comandadas por algo que no sabemos exactamente qué es. Mi punto simplemente no es tanto insistir en una dimensión religiosa, sino entender que justamente lo que es real es es algo que no puede ser imaginado. Es tan sencillo como lo estoy diciendo, simplemente porque está allí, ¿sí? Simplemente porque no podés, digamos, podés imaginar lo que ya pasó, lo que ya sucedió, lo que va a suceder en todo caso. Tengo ahí algunas objeciones con respecto al futuro. Creo que el futuro no se puede imaginar, pero eso es otra discusión que no la voy a dar ahora. Pero me parece que ahí lo importante es entender que justamente la naturaleza es simplemente una manifestación de lo inimaginable que no lo explica ni no lo puede escribir, no lo puede describir en su totalidad. Lo que quiero decir además es que, por eso hablaba de cambiar digamos, de episteme y decir, bueno, la naturaleza es simplemente un indicio de eso inimaginable, pero no es la totalidad de lo inimaginable. Es simplemente una manifestación puntual, fragmentaria, situada, local, insuficiente de algo que es mayor y que no podemos imaginar. Es como, no sé, creo que, no sé, en eso soy gaiano, creo que es imposible imaginar el funcionamiento de Gaia en toda su totalidad, en términos de todas las escalas posibles que tiene de funcionamiento, porque en todas esas escalas posibles, es decir, a nivel macro y a nivel micro, funciona exactamente de la misma forma en términos de reducir la entropía. Y eso en cada una de las reacciones moleculares y en términos de tormentas gigantes y cambios de temperatura a nivel global. Y siempre están, digamos, eso ocurre en todas esas escalas. Y ese funcionamiento es muy sencillo, sin embargo. Eso fue muy sencillo, que es el de reducir la entropía. Y eso ocurre, digamos, en todas esas escalas. El asunto es, bueno, ¿qué es lo inimaginable de todo eso? La totalidad de todo eso, la complejidad de todo eso, no lo sé, no le puedo responder tan directamente, pero me parece que ahí simplemente es una cuestión de entender, es una de escalas, es una de escalas. Bueno, la escala humana es limitada en términos temporales y en términos espaciales, y en eso podés hacer ciertos supuestos y podés imaginar ciertas cosas y otras cosas no. Sí, perdón.
See, so from a perspective of these three ontologies that I mean, the whole point of being ontological flexible is that there are no answers within any ontology. You know, no ontology can capture the whole complexity of reality. So from an indigenous ontology, it's all relationships, right? So we are nature is relationships, is the ants and everything, but for historical reasons, you know, Eurocentric Western society created this other ontology in which they see leads to see ourselves as separate, right? And this has created, is real because it has created the world in which we live, actually, right? But it doesn't has to discard the other perspective. We have to embrace as many. From our Eastern perspective in terms of consciousness, of course, our brain cannot understand the totality of the universe. The arrogance of that is overwhelming. We're just Homo sapiens is an advanced, you know, primate, right? Advanced or at least more complex in some ways, right? And the pretension of understanding, you know, through the brain. Also, if consciousness is the base of reality, the brain is just a manifestation, is the material manifestation of thought processes. Thoughts are not produced by the brain from that ontological perspective. Thoughts are there, and the brain is just the way in which we perceive the manifestation of thoughts, one of the ways in which we can perceive the manifestation of thoughts, right? But it's not, they are not, the brain is not the origin of thought, so, yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm thinking that the ontological flexibility actually is a crucial attribute for transdisciplinary research. In this sense, I want to ask you, how can improve or foster this capacity in terms of the design of the university, but also in terms of the curricula structure?
Yeah, that was my first question. I don't have an answer. I think that's what we need to talk about these things and meet in these places, because I think what we know is that the way universities are structured now are not probably the way, right? And what we need is to maybe different ways of learning, right? Different ways of knowing. Be open to different ways of knowing from different ontologies. And right now what we try to do is there is one universal or one unique way of producing knowledge, and also understanding that there are contradictions between different ways of knowledge. So we shouldn't aim at even try to select what's the best way of knowing this part. No, every way of knowing about a particular object gives you a different angle, and then it might not be you cannot integrate them. You have to learn to live with this uncertainty in a sense, right? So, but I don't know how to translate that into an institutional arrangement, but I think the problem is that our current education system constrain us. We have been uneducated into an unique ontological, and that's because science comes from Christianity, right? And Christianity is also about the one truth, and the one truth that you find in the text is textual, is, you know, the orality and other ways of knowledge are already repressed within Christianity. And we think that science is like a break from Christianity, and it broke at some level, but there is a lot of continuation, right? As scholarship, the scholastics in the 11th century these are the first scientists, and in the 19th century, all the European scientists were also, you know, very religious. So it's we have to understand where we are coming from, really. We don't seem to understand that part very well.
Gracias. Gracias. That was most interesting, and I'm so tired now of thinking and listening that. So it was like a miracle. I just want to say that for a qualitative researcher, ontological flexibility is crucial when you work with human subjects, because you constantly need to make decisions about where you draw the line. Am I right? Or are you right? Or who is right? Is it about being right or what? And it goes with epistemological vigilance. You need to pay a lot of attention to not falling into the trap of I already knew this or I already thought this. So that's a good reminder. But I also want to point out, I was thinking as you went through the vignettes of, we haven't talked about social media all day. That's amazing for a media and communication researcher. And Twitter is a space where ontological lack of flexibility has been a characteristic of many of the engagements. It's not the only thing that happens. It can also be a nourishing space for dialogue of a certain type. But so I realize we also haven't talked about the political so much throughout the day. I mean, we have talked about the politics of academia in some ways, but so I was reminded of Chantal Mouffe. And Chantal Mouffe says we need to be able to keep on talking across differences. Otherwise, there is no democracy. So I would say ontological flexibility is a fundamental concept. I mean, we need to try to operationalize how we teach it and how we practice it, because it goes into democratic knowledge production. And your presentation was a brilliant reminder of the fact that we need to pay attention to that. So I don't have a question, but I wanted to say this.
For a comment.
No, because I'm Esteban, so this is ontological flexibility.
Now you hear me. Yeah, okay. All right, sorry. Yeah, so it seems to me from the examples that you gave and the way that you set it up that not only is humility a precondition for ontological flexibility, but but learning as well, and application of learning, which may imply unlearning sometimes, of the epistemologies that we are rooted in, and maybe which we've built our entire careers on to a certain extent. And that seems to have implications as well for methodological, rather than just epistemological implications, in the sense that if we want to think about co-production of knowledge and democratic co-production of knowledge, we hear often in the context of transdisciplinary discussions the importance of outreach and so forth, but the reversal of that and thinking about inreach and how we can actually, how the research community, the academic research community, needs to be open to a kind of learning and unlearning in its own right, that may actually be willing to accept the limits of what we know and the value of what our co-producing partners can bring to us, whether or not they have any academic standing. I'm kind of riffing here just because these are all thoughts that your presentation made me think of, and I'd be curious for any comment that you might have on this sort of string of thoughts.
Well, one possibility of framing this is in terms of radical contextualization, in a sense, right? We tend to believe that we accumulate knowledge, and that knowledge gets somehow fixed because we believe there is one ontology or one reality, one world, right? And that allows us to say, okay, if there is one world, we can little by little, get fixing it. But what we need is radical contextualization. All knowledge, everything that we can say about the world is contextual, and in one context might be useful, in other contexts might not be useful. And that's an attitude that we need to cultivate, in a sense. We have to say, okay, this situation requires to look at it from this set of assumptions, and this and not only that one, but also from our other set of assumptions. There is no trade-off between using different ontologies, right? But we tend to associate, we tend to assume that there is a trade-off, because then it's like being unable to get some fixed conclusion. So I guess that's the. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you very much.